Novus, the new voice. Vox Novus, the new dimension. Vox Novus, thought and movement leaders who will share from their experience and offer tools to help us navigate our rapidly changing world. My name is Victor Fuhrman. Welcome to Vox Novus, the new voice. With extended longevity comes the opportunity for extended personal growth and spiritual development. How may seniors transition into elders, leaving behind past roles, shift from work in the outer world to inner work with the soul, and find new purpose and authenticity? My guest this week on Vox Novus, Connie Zweig, offers a radical reimagining of age for all generations. Connie Zweig is a retired psychotherapist, former executive editor at J.P. Tarcher Publishing, former columnist and author. Known as the Shadow Expert, her books include Meeting the Shadow and Romancing the Shadow. Her website is conniezweig.com, and she joins me this week to share her path and new book, The Inner Work of Age, Shifting from Role to Soul. Please join me in welcoming to Vox Novus Connie Zweig. Welcome, Connie.
Hi, Victor. Thank you for having me.
And thank you for joining us today and sharing your wisdom, which applies to so many of our listeners. So please share with us your path and how it led you to becoming known as the Shadow Expert.
Oh, okay. Let's see. In the 1980s, I was executive editor of a book publishing house, and I had begun to study the psychology of Carl Jung. I was a meditation practitioner and was looking for psychology that had spirituality kind of built into it. And I came upon Jung, and I ended up launching a series of books at the publishing house that were anthologies. And one of them, which I put together, was called Meeting the Shadow. And Meeting the Shadow was about how we encounter the unconscious process, what's often called the dark side in ourselves in daily life. And it was a big hit, which really told me that there was a need there for understanding this, that people responded to it. Years later, I went to graduate school and got my PhD and opened a private practice in psychology. And I wrote Romancing the Shadow with a colleague. And that book explored the method of shadow work that I developed with Steve Wolf. And once again, people seemed very touched by it and found it very helpful to them. So those books kind of became my referral system in my private practice. People came to see me who wanted to work with their shadows or their unconscious material, the part of us that is normally dormant, but erupts in self-sabotaging ways. It could be in addictions or in moods or in sarcastic remarks or in projections onto other people. It's all about the shadow. So that name, the Shadow Expert, kind of got tagged to me. And I really didn't think I was going to write any more books. But when I entered my 60s and moved toward my late 60s, I began to realize that there were shadow issues about the aging process in midlife and beyond that nobody was writing about. There wasn't any literature that I could find on how our unconscious was shaping our experience in this stage of life. And so that's how the next book, The Inner Work of Age, evolved. It's all about the shadows or the internal obstacles that we meet as we move into later life.
Let's talk a little bit about your previous work. How much of your work with the shadow came through your own personal experience?
Some of it, but definitely not all of it, because I was seeing a lot of clients at the time. And although I disguised their stories, I described them, and their issues pretty clearly with their permission. So I opened Meeting the Shadow with my own story in terms of a dream in which I encountered my shadow. I opened Romancing the Shadow with a kind of a biographical tale about an archetypal experience of uncovering my own shadow material. But most of the books are not about me.
Frank Sinatra sang Kurt Weill's classic September song, including the lyric, "Oh, it's a long, long while from May to December, but the days grow short when you reach September. When the autumn weather turns the leaves to flame, one hasn't got time for the waiting game." We are close in age and lyrically in the September of our lives. Talk about a little more about the inspiration for this book.
Carl Jung, who's one of my mentors, said very famously, the afternoon of life has a different meaning and purpose from the morning of life. If we continue to behave, if we carry into the afternoon of life the behaviors and attitudes of the morning, then we'll suffer damage to our soul. That really spoke to me, because I realized that people all around me in our sort of youth worshiping society are trying anti-aging projects and wanting to continue to look young and act young, and striving to build and produce in the way they did at midlife. And so the meaning and purpose of the afternoon are getting lost. If the meaning of midlife is to build and produce, the meaning of late life or the afternoon is to slow down and self-reflect, to turn within and find a spiritual practice, and explore our own self-knowledge, maybe complete some emotional unfinished business, and move out of denial about aging and death, and move into awareness of it so that we can age consciously. Yes, that quote really struck me.
Let's define a couple of terms: the inner work of age and inner ageist.
The inner work of age refers to the rite of passage that we undergo if we take this on consciously. And my book is filled with tools and practices for completing this rite of passage, for crossing the threshold from senior to elder. So the inner work of age is about that. The inner ageist is a part of that. It's the part of us that we want to uncover and become aware of that carries the cultural ageism in which we swim. So if as children we witness ageist behavior in our families, let's say condescending comments or glances about older people, or we grow up watching television shows that are patronizing of older people, the way I certainly saw in All in the Family and Golden Girls and all kinds of shows. Or if we internalize those stereotypes and biases, then what happens is there is a part of us that buys into it. And as we go through the lifespan, we have an unconscious ageist part of us. I call this a shadow character because it's unconscious. And there's a researcher at Yale University who has spent her career studying this, and she's found that there is impact on our biology, on our cognition, on our mental health, because this internalized ageism that we're carrying with us results in a lack of self-acceptance as we age, a lack of desire to do self-care, a lack of positive feeling about the promises of this time. And this psychologist was able to test this over many decades. And that was startling to me, that this shadow of the inner, what I call the inner ageist, is having an impact on every aspect of our health. And so it's not just outer ageism in the culture that's the concern. It's also the internalized ageism that we carry as a result of that, and all the consequences of this internalized ageism that are important for us.
How may these ageist shadows be addressed?
Well, the first step is to move from denial to awareness. So if we're in denial that we're aging, if we're in denial that we have a symptom that requires a doctor, if we're in denial that at some point we're going to die, which is epidemic in our culture, right? Everybody is, although, that has begun to change with the pandemic because there's been so much death in front of us. But still, look at the denial we see around the pandemic, Victor. People don't want to get vaccinated or wear masks. Why is that? They're in denial of mortality, of their own vulnerability, of their own susceptibility to illness and death. So the first step is moving out of denial into awareness. And then with my method of shadow work, we can walk through the steps and uncover this part of us, the inner ageist, and begin to make a conscious relationship with it, with material that was previously unconscious. And as it moves into our awareness, it has less hold on us, less control over us. So I tell the story in the book of my own experience of that, of discovering that in myself. And the consequences for me of making a conscious relationship with that part of myself, and how I felt about myself as a result, and how I felt about other elders as a result.
How much of that, specifically talking about the resistance to vaccination and wearing masks, is a product of the culture that has been influenced by media expressing that?
Well, I think, this culture has many levels underneath it. And right now we're in this political divide, and people are very tribal. So if their tribes are believing something, they're tending to go along. So if you're in a tribe that's anti-vax and anti-mask, and, I guess I want to say pro-Trump because that's likely, then there's a collective pressure to carry those beliefs and attitudes. And I've seen many times now in the news, interviews of people who are ill or even dying with COVID, expressing terrible regret that they were in denial and that they perpetuated that message. So is the media reporting everything correctly? I don't know. That's a whole other conversation. The media focuses on an awful lot of drama and negativity. But I think that, in the cultural moment in which we live, there's a lot of misinformation. And what I'm focused on is the misinformation that's about ageism. So we also saw during the pandemic, we saw ageism come to the surface in conversations about nursing homes and comments by people who said, oh, those folks in their 80s and 90s, let's not focus on them. Doesn't matter if they die. I mean, that's just outright ageist. That's just outright devaluing these people who have a wealth of life experience and knowledge, and maybe grandparents and great-grandparents. So where does that come from? It comes from this lifetime of internalizing messaging that's all around us.
Do you think that this has changed from the era that we grew up in?
Well, a lot of cultural issues have come out of the collective shadow as we've been growing up, right? So I would say the disability rights movement, the gay and lesbian rights movement, sexual assault, childhood sexual abuse, even with the Catholic clergy, that is still going on. All of these issues used to be hidden. They used to be in the collective closet, or what I call the shadow. And they're all out now in conversation. So we see the very beginnings of an anti-ageism movement happening. The World Health Organization has announced it. Certain magazines have said they won't promote anti-aging products anymore. Many older men and women are now modeling in the same way that young people are. There's some shift happening, but it's nowhere near enough, I think, to kind of battle the inner ageist.
How much of this has been amplified by the pandemic, specifically people of our age group or a little bit younger actually losing their jobs because of COVID?
Well, I think what I see that's happening with the pandemic is that there's kind of an intergenerational battle for resources now. People think that, it came out this week, the year that Social Security will become insolvent. And people think that there's only so much to go around. And so if the older people don't need the resources from the culture, they shouldn't receive them, such as healthcare benefits and all the fighting that's going on around Medicare. And then if they do receive them, there won't be enough for future generations. So that's one thing that's going on. And then there is the battle for jobs that you mentioned, which is about forced retirement due to age that's happening among baby boomers now. And I have a huge chapter on retirement, but it's about the inner world of retirement. It's not really about ageism in the workplace. But let me address the question you asked. So in terms of that, there are two forces, I would say now. One is people are being forced into retirement because of ageism and because people in the next generations want their jobs. And the other is with Encore.org and all these different age organizations gaining some traction now. Some corporations are hiring or rehiring older workers and finding that they work well with young employees, that they can train young employees, that they can learn technology. There can be like a cross mentoring where the kids teach technology and the older adults teach, the workplace skills. So there's some change going on here, but I would generally say that there are so many crises happening right now with climate change and voting rights and immigration and now abortion, that there's not a lot of focus on this. And so I don't really know that it's going to get a lot of attention in the next few years.
And what message does that plant into the mind of those who are forced into those positions?
In my exploration of retirement, what I found was, in a lot of the interviews that I did in the workshops, what I found was that people have a shadow character around retirement that is rooted in their childhood observations of what happened to grandpa, when he stopped working and he just sat around and watched TV all day and he felt useless. Or what happened to a father who couldn't stop and just kept driving and driving and driving himself until he dropped. And so we have internalized these images of retirement, just like we did with the inner ageist. And we have these unconscious parts of ourselves that are influencing our attitudes and our experience of retirement. So if we have those negative images and we're forced into retirement at the workplace, then we may end up feeling silenced, useless, irrelevant, worthless, marginalized. And that's why the inner work of age is so important. There's no guidance in our culture now to counter that experience and to help people so that they don't become depressed and kind of get, swallowed by those feelings. The work instead is to examine who we really are. And that's the subtitle of the book. The subtitle is Shifting from Role to Soul. So we are not really those roles: the provider, the CEO, the therapist, the teacher, the writer, the nurse. That's not really who we are. And so the opportunity when we lose those roles for whatever reason is to take up this work to begin to explore a deeper identity. Who am I really? And, I call this a late life identity crisis because someone who is forced into retirement, he's going to be asking again, or she's going to be asking again, who am I? And so there's this kind of identity crisis that happens. But like the midlife identity crisis, when we could replace our roles with another role or another spouse or another career or another geographic location, those solutions don't work now. Another role is not going to feed our souls. It's time to find something deeper in late life. And so that's really what the book explores.
My guest is Connie Zweig. Her book is called The Inner Work of Age, Shifting from Role to Soul. Connie, please tell our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you.
It's on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and Books A Million and indie books if you like to buy from independent bookstores. If it's not in your local store, please ask them to order it. But it is available now.
And we'll be back with more of Connie after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
Free your mind with OMTimes Radio, IOM FM. OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment, a philanthropic organization. Their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Hello, I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, host of OMTimes Magazine's flagship radio show, What is Going On? My passion is sifting through information, research, and innovations from new thought teachers, speakers, and researchers pushing back the boundaries of what we know about life, energy, metaphysics, and the universe. I love shifting perceptions about who we are, why we're here, and how quickly impossible becomes normal when we open our minds, expand our awareness, and accept that the only limits that exist are those we place upon ourselves. So if you're the kind of forward-thinking, eager investigator of what lies beyond the current reality that most perceive, why not make a date to come play with me in the field of possibilities at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time every Thursday, and together we can discover what's really going on.
Look out, world, we're getting strong. The future's here and we belong. She can STEM, she can do more. Like build a rocket and watch it soar. Or clean the oceans and make the world a better place. Oh, she can STEM, so can you. Find a cure, invent something new. There's no challenge in the world that she can't face. She can STEM.
Learn more at She Can STEM. A message brought to you by the Ad Council.
Back on Vox Novus, my guest this week is Connie Zweig. Her book, The Inner Work of Age. Connie, your book includes interviews with several prominent elders sharing their wisdom. Who are some of those elders, and what will readers glean from their words?
Well, the book is really ecumenical, non-denominational. So I wanted to include the voices of leaders from different spiritual traditions. So Father Thomas Keating, who is renowned for bringing out centering prayer, spoke with me about his own spiritual life review, his awakening process. And it was just a month or two before he died. So it's a very precious interview. I spoke to Ken Wilber, who's the founder of Integral Philosophy, prolific author, and was once called the Einstein of consciousness. And he talks to me about his own aging process and gives his advice to people. I spoke to Rabbi Rami Shapiro, who's kind of an eclectic Jewish rabbi and mystic. And he told me about the practices he does every day, the spiritual practices, which was really interesting. So I spoke to Krishna Das, who's a kirtan leader, a chant leader, who's world renowned now, about his relationship with his guru from India. And a bunch of other people, Roger Walsh and Francis Vaughn, who were had real leaders in the transpersonal psychology movement. I spoke to both of them. And Stan Groff, who was a psychedelic pioneer and transpersonal leader, and is now in his 80s and spoke to me from Europe. He just got married in his 80s. So there are lots of stories of and guidance from these elders. A Zen Roshi, who at the time was the head abbot at the Los Angeles Zen Center. Anyway, so lots of different traditions and different kinds of guidance kind of woven into the basic themes, which is these are the inner obstacles or shadows of age, and this is how we overcome them. These are the tasks that we need to do to work them through and to be able to really live fully in the present moment now.
Many of us boomers found Eastern practices such as yoga and meditation in our 20s and 30s. Many have pursued them, and many have let them go as adulthood ensued. How may we re-embrace these practices?
You know, one of the people I interviewed was Anna Douglas. She's a Buddhist teacher now in her 80s who was one of the co-founders of Spirit Rock Meditation Center in California. And this was before the pandemic. She said to me, boomers are flocking to Spirit Rock now to learn to meditate again. And so I do think that is a desire, a longing that arises in people if they've given up their practices. And so there's a section in the book about how to find a new practice that really fits who you are now, how to go about that. And then it offers a whole bunch of practices from different traditions. And so I think what's important is that, we look in the traditions or the lineage that resonates with us. And we look for the contemplative practices, the experiential practices, rather than the dogma or beliefs. And we try them out and we see what fits, what really fits who we are now. One person told me that she practices yoga in order to stay flexible. She practices mindfulness in order to stay present. She practices chanting with her friends. So, there isn't one size fits all for a generation or any generation, because this is a very personal search. And I really tried in the book not to tell people what to do or what to believe or how to be. This is really a guide to explore yourself, to enter your own inner world, and to find what feels right for you.
My life has been blessed with a spiritual path that expanded in my mid-40s and actually has come to the fore since the onset of COVID and the ending of a 42-year business career in March of 2020. That path has given me renewed purpose. How may those going through the inner work of age approach and perhaps re-examine their spirituality?
You know, again, this is really individual. I wrote about this extensively with a lot of suggestions for how people can read about this or speak to friends who have practices they like, or do some of the practices in my book. For example, I offer the practice of life review, and I'm not really oriented to the past. I've never really been nostalgic or looked back a lot. But when I did my life review of both my lived life and my unlived life, I discovered something that was really meaningful to me. I discovered that all of my 4 careers, which I thought had been very distinct, actually had one mission. And that mission was the transmission of information about consciousness. It showed up in many different forms, but I now see it as my soul's mission. And this book, The Inner Work of Age, is a natural extension of that. I had thought it was, like a leap away, but it's not. It's a natural extension of my lifelong purpose or my soul's mission. So if you do a life review the way that it's outlined in the book for you, you can discover all kinds of things. You might discover some relationships that you had forgotten about that need to give or receive forgiveness. And you can do that emotional repair work now. There's time. And it will help you to avoid dying with regret, to do that emotional repair work. Or you may have a trauma, an early wound that you never really worked through. You can do that now with therapy, with coaching. There's so much available. And you can be present to yourself in that way now. Give that gift to yourself now. It may be that there's a creative dream that you always had and you were never able to live out because you got so busy building a career and a family. There's that memoir you always wanted to write, or painting you wanted to do, or a musical instrument you wanted to play. And maybe the life review jogs your memory of that. You can pick that up now. This is one of the opportunities of the new longevity. All these years that we have after retirement, we can explore all of these things now, as well as picking up a spiritual practice. So there are many possibilities for this time of life.
And I've seen personally, in my personal life and through friends, so many of us between their 60s and 70s going back to school.
Uh-huh. Yes, I have a friend in his 70s who just started at UCLA. I think it's it's not UCLA Extension, but it's an adult school at UCLA. And he's studying the courses that he always wanted to learn about, intellectual development as well.
Absolutely. And my personal situation, my wife, who's 64, she'll be 65 in December, actually just went back for her master's degree.
Oh, how fabulous.
So all of this is available to us, and finding that path and renewing that path of education and bringing to fore the things that we've always wanted to learn or were interested in or aspired to, but for whatever reason, career or whatever else it was, family, we never had the opportunity when we were younger. So absolutely.
Exactly. Yes.
Absolutely. Wonderful things to be done. One of your chapters is entitled A Call to Sacred Service and elder activism. How may we answer this call and find renewed purpose?
Here's one of the things that I found that's really interesting with the people I interviewed. Many people are more introverted than others, which means that they find their gold, their juice, their inspiration from within. And those people may want more quiet time, more solitary time for reading and contemplation and meditation now. And other people are more extroverted, and they get their juice and their inspiration from going out to speak with other people, to listen, and to engage in the world. And there's so many opportunities now for elders who want to serve something larger than themselves. There are elder organizations like Elders Action Network, where you can find community and other folks who are working in social justice arenas, climate change and racism and all kinds of things. The point of that chapter for me was to build a bridge between the inner work and the outer work. To point out that if we were activists, as I was in my 20s, we're no longer going to be activists like that now as elders. We're going to be fueled by compassion, perhaps, more than anger. We're not going to have so much projection and do so much enemy making because of all that we've learned. We're going to maybe we'll have less attachment to the outcome of our actions. So we can begin to serve as elders in a different way, with a different level of awareness than we did earlier in our lives. And if we're continuing our inner work, it will influence our outer work. If we are aware of our shadows, for example, we won't engage them in the same way with our activism. And so, I noticed an announcement this week by Jane Fonda, who's 83, that she's joined with Greta Thunberg and Bill McKibben and all these climate activists to start an organization for elders who want to fight climate change. It's called Third Act. And I thought that was really inspiring. You can find Third Act online and you can get engaged. And, if you're comfortable working online, you can do that. If you want to work in your local community, I've worked locally with Citizens Climate Lobby, which lobbies Congress for a carbon tax. So there are all kinds of ways that we can serve, and there are smaller ways. Grandparents also serve by teaching their grandkids how to read. So it's a beautiful time of life for that, when we're not focused on paid work and building families, and our kids are grown up and our careers are over, and many people feel a generosity rising up in them to give back.
Absolutely. I know in my area here in New York City, there are those of us who are going out and shopping for those who can't, providing services to transportation, for example, for those who can't or cannot do it on their own, and just volunteering in many, many fields and many aspects and bringing service to the community. And I think you'll probably find that throughout the United States.
Yes, there's opportunities everywhere.
Absolutely. My guest is Connie Zweig. Her book is called The Inner Work of Age. We'll be back with more of Connie after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free. AscendingHearts.com.
Imagine yourself being transported to India, to the banks of the Ganga and an ashram in Rishikesh. Visualize that you are welcome to satsang with an American sannyasi who shares the wisdom of her guru. Your visualization has manifested. Join Sattvi Bhagawati Saraswati for inspiration and transformation every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio.
Hi, we're the Goo Goo Dolls. We're fortunate that we can give our daughters everything they need to grow and learn. But not every child can focus on classes and play dates.
Nearly 13 million kids in the U.S. face hunger. That's 1 in 6. School lunch might be their only meal each day, and it's heartbreaking to imagine any child going to bed hungry. We're dreaming of a perfect day when kids can smile, play, and just be kids without worrying about where their next meal will come from. Feeding America is working to make that perfect day a reality.
Each year, the Feeding America network of food banks rescues billions of pounds of good food that would have gone to waste. That food is given to families and children in need. Being a kid should be about doing things that make an ordinary day extraordinary. Learning to play an instrument, building a sandcastle, hosting tea parties. Hunger should never be an obstacle to growing up.
You can help end childhood hunger in your community by visiting feedingamerica.org.
Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Not completing high school is more of a social thing than it was an academic thing. I came out in the 11th grade. Nobody was embracing you. The kids were cruel. It was very difficult to be gay. Even though all these years have passed, I still had that longing to have my diploma.
The hard part was determining that I was going to do it, but I definitely didn't do it alone.
At age 30, with the help of her mentor, Carissa finished her high school diploma.
I have a mentor, Maria. She convinced me to continue my education and to finish what I started to get my diploma. Just never judges. She's a true role model. If you're even considering getting your high school diploma, go get it. You can do it.
No one gets a diploma alone. If you're thinking of finishing your high school diploma, you have help. Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org. That's finishyourdiploma.org. Brought to you by the Dollar General Literacy Foundation and the Ad Council.
Hi, this is Bill Maher. I can find humor in almost anything, but one thing I never laugh about is cruelty to animals. If you don't get the joke either, write People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, 501 Front Street, Norfolk, Virginia, 23510.
Dad, I picked up your pills, made your lunch, and your laundry is done.
When you care for a loved one, you take care of everything. But are you taking care of yourself? Find free care guides at aarp.org/caregiving. Brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
Back on Vox Novus, my guest this week is Connie Zweig. We're talking about her book, The Inner Work of Age. Connie, one of the wonderful aspects of life in indigenous cultures is that elders are regarded as a repository of wisdom. Is there a way, in your thoughts, that we can bring this to Western culture?
I know that everything we've been talking about today is connected to this. Ageism is connected to this. Cultural attitudes and biases are connected to this. The youth-oriented culture, and also the lack of rites of passage in our society. Because becoming an elder requires a rite. And that was part of why I wrote this book. I wanted the book to sort of walk you through the steps from senior to elder. We all become seniors when we turn 65 with the Medicare birthday, right? But what is an elder? An elder has done that inner work. And so it requires intention and attention and time and guidance to know how to do that, to really become an elder. And I think indigenous cultures kind of had that built in long ago. I don't know how much it continues now in current cultures in the West or in Africa, or I don't know how much that continues. But I know that we are missing that in Western post-industrial society. And so I wanted to become an elder myself. And so I figured out how to do that. I gave myself a ritual on my retirement, and I did all this research and interviews, and I did this inner work for myself. And I really felt a profound shift. And it's a shift in my level of awareness and my feelings about myself at 72 years of life experience, and in my attitude toward others who are also in their 60s or 70s or 80s. So becoming an elder is very rich, and it's a noble archetype. You know, as a depth psychologist, I would say it's an archetype. And elders are made, not born. So the book is an invitation to our listeners to take that on, if that is appealing to you. And if you're more interested in indigenous styles of becoming elders, there are online workshops now, I think, to do that with some native teachers. There's also the Conscious Elders Network, I believe it's called, that takes people on vision quests to become elders. So you can search around, but what I would say is it's not an automatic process. It's an intentional process, and it takes time and caring and the inner work of age.
I remember sitting with my grandparents as a child and being delighted with the stories they shared of their lives in Europe before emigrating to the United States in the late 1800s. In this age of cyber devices and information overload, how may grandparents renew that special connection?
Again, I don't know how many. I know that, you know,
how may?
Oh,
I'm
how
sorry,
may. I thought you said how many. Sorry.
No.
How may. You know, each family system is different. So I'm not prescribing behavior because, you know, as a therapist, I know what it means to step into a family dynamic and start trying to change things. What I'm saying is that we can model a positive and creative and healthy old age for our grandchildren. That in itself is huge. That in itself will affect how they internalize images of age. We can also, as elders, be authentic, you know, drop the masks and the outworn roles and be authentic. I like the image of a shady tree. I often think of that when my grandson is sitting next to me, that I'm like a tree offering shade to him. And he can feel the stillness in my body. His household is very chaotic and full of anxiety. And there's nothing I can do about that, except to be this antidote for him when he's with me and offer him shade and stillness. And I can feel it kind of seeping into his body beyond whatever words are said, right? So we can be that kind of presence. We can offer advice when it's asked for. I think it's very tricky in some families, you know, to be too involved as a grandparent. And so the last section of my book, the epilogue, is a letter to the grandchildren of the future. And it's really what I wish for my 4 grandkids, but it's also what I wish for all future generations. And that's something that every grandparent can do. We can write a legacy letter, or as I said before, we can record a video, and we can leave that for the family. I know in my case, the adult kids have read this legacy letter to the grandkids, which was really touching for me. So, so that's my advice. It's very sticky to intrude. I think we have to respect boundaries around parenting. But that also means managing our own reactions, to what we see. And so it's very tricky, Victor.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. So many of us have lost family and dear friends recently. Grieving is unique to each of us, and these losses remind us of our own mortality. How may we face the shadow of mortality?
So I suggest in my book that cultivating mortality awareness is really a task to become an elder. If we are in denial that we're going to die or become ill or change, then we're not actually facing this profound truth that there's a limited time horizon in front of us. And as we start to wake up to that, whether through COVID and, being a witness to all this death, perhaps for many people for the first time, or being a witness to the death of a loved one, a friend or family member, or getting ill ourselves, getting a life-threatening illness, what do? For most people, we wake up to mortality for a moment, and then we push it away again, back into the shadow. How many of us really allow it to penetrate and recognize my Conniness shall pass? All this shall pass, but my Conniness shall pass. I will not be here as I am now. This body will not be here. And whether we believe that something in us will go on or not, soul or consciousness or spirit or whatever we call it, I'm not addressing that because those personal beliefs, are individual. What I'm saying is this individuality, this Conniness in this body will be gone. It's 72 years old now. So how does that affect my choices of how I spend my time now? What does that mean to what's really valuable to me? What are my priorities? Because I have more time behind me than ahead of me. So what does that mean for how I use this time now? And that can be a wake-up call to people. That can be extremely valuable in terms of the legacy I want to leave, the relationships I might want to heal, the projects I might want to complete. And if time seems to stretch forever and I'm not thinking about it, I'm not going to rush to do those things. So mortality awareness is a profound teaching. We are not in control of when we die or how we die. And that is very humbling for the ego. The ego is not in charge of that. And so we are faced with this force that's beyond our control. And I think that's part of what people don't want to deal with. It's beyond their control. So getting through this denial is not morbid. It's actually a gift because there's this alchemical process that can happen. Okay, I'm here in late life. What really matters now? And what will keep me from dying with regret? If I am on my deathbed, what will I regret not saying, not giving, not doing?
It's almost like a form of initiation.
It is. It's a practice. And it's profound. And in many of the mystical traditions, people were taught to walk through cemeteries, to meditate on skulls. There are these like shocking practices because it is initiatory.
Her book is called The Inner Work of Age. My guest, Connie Zweig. Connie, one more time, please tell our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you.
Well, my website is conniezweig.com. And you'll find there all of the online workshops that I'm doing in the next few months. If you're interested and want to join me, I'm doing workshops on the inner work of retirement, on creativity, on shifting from role to soul. You can find them there. You can find the book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Indie Books, Books A Million, or at your local store.
Connie, thank you so much for joining us and sharing this really important wisdom.
Thank you, Victor. Much appreciated.
And thank you for joining us on Vox Novus. I'm Victor, the Voice Fuhrman. Have a wonderful week.